Picture this: the royal halls of Delhi, glowing with candlelight and silk, where whispers of immortality drift through the perfumed air. Behind those velvet curtains, a queen gazes into a mirror that no longer flatters her. The years have been kind to her throne, but cruel to her beauty. And when every herb, every charm, every prayer failed, she turned to the unthinkable. Tonight, we uncover the legend of the queen who defied death and lost her soul instead. In the 17th century, when the Mughal Empire still glimmered like a jewel across the Indian subcontinent, Delhi stood at the heart of power, a city of marble, incense, and secrets. The Mughal courts were alive with scholars, poets, and mystics, but behind their grace and beauty lingered a silent terror, the obsession with immortality. Among queens and courtiers, youth was not merely admired, it was worshipped. Every wrinkle was a threat, every gray hair a quiet betrayal. And within this gilded world lived a woman whose beauty was said to rival the moonlight, a queen known to history only through whispers. Some said she was the beloved consort of a powerful noble. Others claimed she was a forgotten empress, erased from the chronicles by fear itself. Her story was passed down not in books, but in frightened murmurs, the tale of a woman who sought to stop time through a forbidden ritual, a woman who believed purity could be stolen, and that youth could be renewed in blood. Tonight, we travel deep into the shadows of her legend, where devotion and madness became one. Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoy uncovering the darkest legends hidden in history's palaces, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and share your thoughts. It helps us bring more forgotten stories back to life. The legend begins in the old city of Shahjahanabad, the beating heart of Mughal Delhi. The year was 1643, a time when the empire gleamed with perfection, its gardens blooming with jasmine and its palaces crowned in gold. Beneath that beauty, however, the court was a crucible of envy and ambition. Every gaze held judgment, every compliment carried poison. It was within this shimmering labyrinth of intrigue that the queen, known to later chroniclers only as Banu of the Mirrors, began her quiet descent into obsession. She had once been adored for her beauty, her laughter lighting up the emperor's private halls. Poets compared her eyes to sapphires, her voice to the Vena's strings. But beauty in the palace was both crown and curse. For every year she aged, another concubine was chosen, another dancer praised, another pair of eyes turned elsewhere. And so, the mirror that once adored her became her greatest enemy. At first, her decline was invisible. Servants noticed her, sleeping less, staring at her reflection long after midnight prayers. Physicians were summoned, the finest in Delhi, bringing with them herbs from Persia, salves of pearl dust, and oils said to reverse time. None of it worked. The queen's hands trembled more each day. Her eyes sank deeper into the hollows of worry. But it wasn't the body she feared losing. It was the empire's gaze. In the Mughal court, beauty was power. It could raise families, end wars, or decide a dynasty's fate. To fade was to vanish. And so, Banu sought answers not from the scholars of medicine, but from those who trafficked in silence. The mystics, the fakirs, the whisperers who lived on the city's edge. She disguised herself as a common woman and wandered into the old quarter, where the sacred and the forbidden often touched. There, in a crumbling haveli, lit only by oil lamps, she met a woman the city called Amira the Veiled. Some said she had once served in the royal kitchens. Others claimed she was a witch exiled from Agra. When the queen entered, Amira bowed, her eyes glinting beneath her veil. "You have come," she said softly, "not for beauty, but for fear." Banu said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. The old woman offered her a silver vial filled with dark liquid and told her it contained the essence of renewal. It was not blood, though legend would later twist it into that, but a concoction of saffron, rosewater, and rare roots believed to draw out illness and strengthen the flesh. But remember, Amira warned, it is not the body that ages first. It is the heart. If you feed your vanity, you will feed your curse. The queen smiled, thanked her, and returned to the palace. She never spoke of that night again. For weeks, she followed Amira's instructions, applying the potion to her face beneath the moonlight. Her servants whispered of strange rituals, of her chambers smelling of smoke and iron, of mirrors covered with cloth, of murmured prayers that were not from the Quran. Whether these tales were true or born of fear, no one could say. What is certain is that Banu's appearance seemed to change. Her skin regained its glow, her eyes shone with the fire of youth. Courtiers began to whisper that she had found the secret of eternal beauty. The emperor, long distracted by politics and new alliances, found himself once again drawn to her presence. For a while, Banu's smile returned. But so did her hunger. Because once she saw the palace bow before her again, she could not bear the thought of losing that power. She became consumed with maintaining it. Every day, she demanded stronger mixtures, rarer ingredients, more complex rituals. Her maids traveled across the empire in search of powders from Bengal, oils from Kashmir, roots from Persia. She became distant, no longer attending gatherings or festivals. Her chambers were filled with incense so heavy that visitors felt dizzy. And then the dreams began. Banu spoke of seeing a river of crimson light, of hands reaching out from it, of voices promising her eternity if she would only wash away the weakness of others. The court physicians diagnosed exhaustion, but the mystics murmured of possession. Still, the queen continued. Every moonless night, she would lock herself in her chamber and perform her rituals before the mirror. The maids said they could hear her chanting verses they did not recognize, her voice rising and falling like a song. When she emerged, she seemed calmer, radiant even. But her eyes no longer held warmth. It was as if something else was looking out through them, something ancient and sorrowful. Over time, the palace grew fearful. Servants began resigning quietly, nobles avoided her gaze, and even the emperor spoke to her through curtains. Rumors spread that she had made a pact with jinns, that her beauty was no longer human. Some even claimed that flowers in her garden bloomed red overnight, their petals darkening as if stained. Imagine walking through that palace then. The same marble, halls that once echoed with laughter now heavy with silence. Guards stood motionless, pretending not to hear the faint sounds that came from her locked doors. The air itself seemed colder near her quarters, and though the empire outside still thrived, caravans arriving from Samarkand, scholars debating, in the bazaars. Within those walls, time had stopped. Banu's reflection had become her world. Every smile, every glance, every tremor of light on her face was her kingdom. But obsession is a slow fire. It does not burn the body first. It burns the mind. She began distrusting everyone, accusing her maids of stealing her potions, her cooks of poisoning her meals, her musicians of mocking her age in their songs. The emperor tried to intervene once, but she met him with words so cold, he never entered her chamber again. And then came the night that sealed her legend. The palace was silent, the moon shrouded by clouds. Her most loyal maid, the only one who dared stay, claimed she saw the queen kneeling before the mirror, whispering a prayer. In the reflection, she said, the queen's face was young again, but the image behind her was not her own. It was darker, shifting, like the shadow of someone standing where no one stood. When dawn came, the queen was found asleep on the marble floor, her mirror cracked from end to end. She awoke unharmed, but she never spoke of what she had seen. From that day on, she covered every mirror in her chambers and refused to look into one again. The palace never smelled of incense after that night, only of roses. And yet, those who saw her claimed her beauty had not faded. Weeks turned into months, and the court began to live in the shadow of Banu's silence. The emperor aged before his time, some said from grief, others from guilt. Ministers whispered that the queen's curse had spread beyond her chambers. Drought hit Delhi that year. The Yamuna ran lower than memory could recall. The gardens withered, and the peacocks no longer danced in the rain. Priests read omens in the stars and found only warnings. "The palace has offended time itself," one of them said, trembling before the imperial court. No one dared mention her name, but everyone knew who the prophecy spoke of. For all her isolation, the queen's presence lingered everywhere. In the faint scent of rose that drifted through the corridors, in the unease that clung to the courtiers' faces, and in the echo of her name carried by the wind. Inside her chambers, Banu lived between prayer and illusion. She spent hours before the covered mirrors, sometimes speaking to them as though something waited beneath the cloth. Her attendants claimed she would hum to herself, repeating fragments of lullabies her mother once sang to her as a child. But when they drew near, she would fall silent and send them away. The palace chronicler, who dared record her behavior, described her handwriting changing over time. Elegant lines becoming jagged, her ink blotted with what looked like tears. And yet her beauty still remained, untouched by age. It was unnatural, almost divine. Enemies could not deny it. One court poet wrote in secret, "She has conquered decay, but lost the world in doing so." But here's the chilling part. History is rarely kind to women who defy its rules. The legend that would outlive her was not written by truth, but by fear. The maids who left the palace spoke of forbidden rituals, of shadows moving beneath candlelight, of whispered incantations that called upon ancient spirits. Over time, the tale grew darker. They claimed that she had discovered a way to renew her youth, not through alchemy or faith, but through sacrifice. It was said that she lured the daughters of her servants to secret ceremonies, draining their vitality to restore her glow. Of course, none of this was ever proven. There were no bodies, no trials, no confessions. But in a city where rumor spreads faster than truth, her silence became guilt. By the time she was 35, the people outside the palace walls no longer called her Banu of the Mirrors. They called her the Queen of Blood. Imagine living under that name. Every knock on her door was suspicion, every candle's flicker an accusation. Still, She refused to leave her sanctuary. Perhaps she believed that by hiding from the world, she could outlast it. And for a while it seemed she did. Her face remained serene, her eyes untouched by time's cruelty. The emperor grew frail, his power slipping into the hands of advisers who despised her influence. One night, during a private council, they urged him to exile her to the southern palace. For her health, they said, though everyone knew it was for their peace of mind. He agreed reluctantly. Guards arrived before dawn to escort her away. But when they opened her door, they found her kneeling once again before her mirror, uncovered for the first time in months. The reflection staring back at her was not the face of a queen, but something hollow, aged, and almost lifeless. She did not resist. She rose calmly, veiled herself, and left the palace without a word. The next morning, a strange mist rolled through the gardens, and the roses wilted overnight. Her exile became legend. The southern palace at Mehrauli, surrounded by ancient ruins and dense trees, became her new home, or prison, depending on who told the story. Locals swore they saw lights flickering in the windows at night, even when the palace had long been abandoned. Travelers passing by claimed to hear the faint sound of singing, a melody so beautiful it made their hearts ache. Some said they saw a woman dressed in white walking along the palace walls, her face hidden, her steps leaving no mark on the earth. Whether it was her ghost or her guilt that haunted that place, no one could tell. But the legend of the queen spread far beyond Delhi. Persian traders carried it to Isfahan, European merchants to Goa, and poets to every corner of the empire. Each retelling made it darker, more forbidden, more terrifying, more unforgettable. And, yet, behind the superstition, there is something heartbreakingly human about her story. Banu's tragedy wasn't in her alleged rituals or her madness. It was in her refusal to let time take its course. In an age where a woman's worth was measured by her youth, she tried to rewrite nature itself. Modern scholars believe her. Rituals may have been early experiments with herbal medicine and rejuvenation practices, misunderstood, exaggerated, and turned into myth by those who feared her power. Others see her as a symbol of how women in history are often demonized for their ambition and intellect. The phrase bathing in blood may have been metaphorical, a poetic accusation from jealous courtiers who resented her defiance. Into truth, it might have been nothing more than the image of her applying crimson-hued herbal oils, her skin glowing under lamplight, misunderstood by those eager to vilify her. But legends rarely care for nuance. Once the story escaped the palace, it lived a life of its own. Pilgrims began visiting the ruins of her exile, leaving flowers at the doorstep, praying for beauty, fertility, and protection from envy. Ironically, the woman once accused of vanity became a guardian spirit for those seeking grace. Centuries later, British historians rediscovered her tale and sensationalized it, comparing her to Europe's Countess Bathory, the Blood Countess. Paintings and penny novels turned her into a villainess cloaked in crimson silk. Delhi's poets, however, remembered her differently. They wrote of a queen whose heart broke under the weight of expectation, whose search for eternal youth was really a search for freedom. From time, from love, from herself. Imagine standing in those ruins today. The walls cracked, vines climbing through the marble arches, the faint hum of the city in the distance. If you listen closely, you might almost hear the echo of anklets on stone, the whisper of silk in the night breeze. The locals still tell her story to curious travelers, always lowering their voice near the end. She wanted to live forever, they say. And in a way, she did. For in every retelling, every fearful whisper, every poem written in her memory, she still breathes. Her name, blurred by myth yet bright with mystery, survives where even empires have turned to dust. Centuries passed, and with them, the Mughal Empire itself faded into memory. The marble palaces grew silent, their fountains dry, their arches broken by time. Empires rise, empires fall, but stories endure. And among the thousands that Delhi carries in its dust and wind, few are as enduring or as quietly haunting as the tale of the queen who refused to age. By the late 19th century, when British archaeologists began cataloguing the old palaces, they stumbled upon the ruins at Mehrauli. Beneath layers of dust, they found fragments of a mirror, its surface darkened by centuries of decay. Etched faintly into the frame was an inscription in Persian, "Time bows to no one." It was the only artifact they recovered that hinted at Banu's existence. The rest was rumor, scattered across chronicles, letters, and oral tales passed down through servants' families. But sometimes, rumor holds more truth than records ever can. One of the archaeologists, a young scholar named Edward Linley, became obsessed with her legend. In his journals, now preserved in the archives of London, he wrote, "There is a sadness in the ruins, as though they remember her grief." He spent years collecting every version of her story, tracing her life from the heart of Shahjahanabad to her final exile. In his notes, he made a startling observation, that almost every account described her with a kind of reverence, not fear. The peasants who lived nearby lit candles for her. The old women called her my mother. If she was a monster, Linley wrote, why do they pray to her still? Perhaps, he suggested, the truth was more complicated, that the queen's supposed rituals were acts of early medical experimentation, maybe attempts to treat illness or preserve vitality in a time when medicine was bound by superstition. And when those efforts failed, rumor replaced reason. The blood she was accused of bathing in may have been no more than the color of her mixtures: saffron, sandalwood, and crushed petals that turned the water red. Still, the myth persisted. As Linley's work circulated, artists, mystics, and novelists across Europe revived her tale. She became a symbol, not of horror, but of the human refusal to surrender to mortality. Some saw her as a warning that vanity, unchecked, consumes the soul. Others saw in her a tragic mirror, a woman punished for daring to want what every ruler secretly craved: control over time itself. Even in modern Delhi, her legend lingers. The ruins of her southern palace remain off-limits after sunset, and guards claim that lights sometimes flicker within, as though candles were still burning behind the broken latticework. Local children tell each other that if you whisper her name 3 times near the gates, the air turns cold. But the older generation treats her with quiet respect, as if acknowledging that her story, true or not, deserves remembrance. What fascinates historians today isn't the horror, but the psychology. Why did such legends take root? And why, across cultures, do stories of women seeking eternal youth so often end in tragedy? Perhaps because they reflect our collective fear of decay, not just of the body, but of relevance, love, and legacy. For a queen, aging was political death. To remain beautiful was to remain visible, powerful, desired. When she began to fade, her world turned against her. And when she sought to reclaim that power, history branded her a witch. In truth, she may have been a victim of the court's expectations, of her own reflection, of the timeless cruelty that equates a woman's worth with her youth. The legend of Banu endures not because of what she allegedly did, but because of what she represented. The price of defiance in a world built on illusion. Imagine her final years, alone in the southern palace, her once grand mirrors shattered, her servants gone, her reflection her only company. Some say she grew frail but peaceful, her vanity replaced by quiet repentance. Others insist she vanished entirely. One night the guards found her chambers empty, the doors still locked from within. A faint fragrance of roses lingered, and her veil lay folded on the marble floor. Whether she died, ascended, or became one with the myth she created, no one can say. But centuries later, when the last Mughals were dethroned and Delhi's palaces were looted by the British, a rumor spread among the soldiers who searched the ruins that a woman in white had been seen walking the corridors at dawn, her face serene, her eyes endless. They said she paused before a shattered mirror, smiled faintly, and whispered, "I am still here." Today, historians sift through archives trying to separate truth from legend. But sometimes, that separation no longer matters. The line between myth and memory blurs, and in that space, Banu lives on. Her story has inspired plays, novels, and documentaries, each retelling painting her differently. Villain, victim, visionary. Perhaps she was all three. And perhaps, beneath the layers of exaggeration, what survives is not her beauty or her alleged crimes, but her humanity, her fear of time, her longing to be remembered, her refusal to fade quietly into history. In that sense, she succeeded. For while empires have turned to dust and rulers' names have vanished from marble, hers still lingers, whispered in marketplaces, carved into old walls, sung in lullabies. And if you ever walk through Delhi on a quiet night when the monsoon air carries the scent of rain and roses, listen carefully. Some say you can still hear the echo of her anklets along the old Mughal roads, a soft rhythmic sound, like the beating of a heart long forgotten. Whether it is the wind or memory itself, no one knows. But in that moment, you'll understand what the old chroniclers meant when they wrote, "The queen did not fear death. She feared being forgotten." And in that, she triumphed. Because every time her legend is told, she is reborn. Not in blood, not in ritual, but in remembrance. Centuries later, the marble palaces have turned to dust, the mirrors to ash. But her story refuses to die. Maybe that's the real magic she discovered. Not eternal youth, but eternal memory. The tale of Banu, the queen of the mirrors, reminds us that obsession can be both a crown and a curse. In her desperate attempt to hold on to beauty, she became something far more enduring, a symbol of how deeply the human spirit fears time, yet longs to defy it. Her legend still walks through Delhi's ruins, not as a ghost, but as a question whispered to anyone who gazes too long into the mirror. What would you give to never fade? And perhaps that's why her story still grips us. Because somewhere, inside, we understand her. We all fear the ticking clock. We all wish to hold on to the moments that make us feel alive. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon, and like the video. It helps us keep these forgotten voices alive. And tell us in the comments what kind of dark historical legends you'd like to see next.